You think you're living your life, but it's living you. Everything you call choice is just the unconscious acting out its own story, and you, the actor, believing in the role. Carl Jung discovered that life isn't what happens to you, it's what happens through you. Suffering, love, emptiness, falling, none of it is chance. It's consciousness trying to remember who it is, using your skin as an instrument. And if this idea scares you, it's because the ego still believes it's the author of the play. But the ego lies, and its lie is comfortable. It makes you believe you can control the script when the script has always controlled you. The awakening is brutal because it strips you of the pleasure of guilt. It forces you to see that every pain was an invitation, every loss a revelation. And once you understand this, there's no going back. Reality no longer seems random. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start realizing what is trying to be born through me. If this question burned you inside, sign up now, because no one here will protect you from the truth. You think you're living your life, but the truth is, it's living you. With every breath, something greater expresses itself through you, and your mistake is believing you're in control. Carl Jung said the soul is a current that runs beneath what we call self. Everything you call decision, fate, or coincidence is just consciousness playing at finding out. You think you're choosing a path, when in fact, it's the path that chose you. There's a force within you that doesn't care about your desires. It wants only one thing, for you to see the truth behind your masks. And that's why when you try to run away, life pursues you until it brings you to your knees. Spirituality isn't about ascending, it's about descending. Descending into the mire where the soul truly lives. Jung understood this when he delved into his own shadow and realized that the external world was nothing more than a psychic mirror. Every person who irritates you, every situation that hurts you, every illusion that shatters you, all are reflections of what you haven't yet understood about yourself. The falseness you hate in others is the same one you practice on yourself when you pretend to be someone you're not. And the more you try to maintain this mask, the heavier it becomes. There are people who spend their entire lives playing roles their souls never intended. Parents trying to be heroes, children trying to be perfect, lovers trying to be salvation. But the soul doesn't want applause. It wants to be seen. Consciousness moves through you like a living mirror, and each experience is its attempt to recognize itself. When love arrives, it observes your capacity for surrender. When pain arrives, it tests your lucidity. When silence consumes you, it forces you to hear what you've always ignored. You're not here to accumulate victories, you're here to reveal truths. And the more you try to manipulate the script, the more life rips the pages and rewrites what needs to be learned. The ego's falsehood is thinking it knows what's best for the soul. But what the soul wants is rarely comfortable. That's why life dismantles you with such precision. It's not revenge, it's revelation. Because what you call chaos is just the unconscious asking to be seen. But if everything that happens is a mirror, what happens when the mirror starts moving on its own? When traumas, people, and encounters begin to act like characters in a theater directed by the shadow itself? That's what life will show you in the next step, the theater of the unconscious. No one told you the script was written long before you were born. Carl Jung said the unconscious is the true playwright of existence, and the ego, that little mask you call I, is just the actor trying to understand the plot while the play is already underway. Everything that happens to you, from the betrayal you swore you'd never forgive to the hug that made you cry, is part of the soul's performance. Spirituality, when it's real, isn't a light show, but a descent into the basement where the shadow pulls the strings of fate. The falsehood lies in thinking you master the script. The truth is, you only wake up when the plot collapses. It's there, when the persona breaks, that consciousness begins to see who's really in charge. Each character that crosses your path represents a piece of your unconscious trying to be recognized. The friend who disappoints you, the partner who controls you, the enemy who challenges you, they are all actors in the same play. The soul writes its roles with surgical precision. Jealousy, abandonment, pride, all serve the awakening. You say you want peace, but you seek the right conflict to discover where you're still wrong. It's easy to hate the villain, difficult to realize that he speaks with your own voice. Jung observed this in his patients. Each repeated drama was a symbol, each repetition a message from the shadow. Life isn't cruel, it's didactic. And the more you refuse to listen, the more the scenario repeats itself. The theater of the unconscious is silent but relentless. When you fall in love with someone else's mask, life reveals yours. When you judge someone else's falsehood, your soul exposes your hypocrisy. True spirituality begins when you stop running from the mirror and accept the role you're playing. And if you want to change the play, you need to step out of the spotlight. Observe, not act. This isn't giving up, it's awareness. The next time something hurts, you ask, what part of me is asking to be seen? This is the secret rehearsal for awakening. But if the unconscious is the director of this theater and every pain is a rehearsal for reality, what happens when the stage begins to crumble and life forces you to look backstage? That's when the most mysterious machine in the universe is born, the machine for becoming conscious. Life has a single purpose, to pull you out of unconsciousness, and it will do so however necessary, gently if you listen, brutally if you resist. Carl Jung said the unconscious is not an enemy, but a master who speaks a symbolic language. Every pain, every repetition, every failure is its attempt to wake you up. The machine of consciousness doesn't work with pleasure, it operates with friction. When everything falls apart, it's because the gears are turning. Anxiety, loneliness, emptiness, none of these are accidents. It's the self pushing the ego until it gives way. You think you're breaking, but it's the cocoon cracking. Awakening doesn't begin with light. It begins with rupture. There's a hidden pattern in what hurts you. The person who rejects you, the work that doesn't flow, the love that repeats itself. These are precise mechanisms. Spiritual engineering designed to expose what you haven't yet seen. Jung called this the individuation process, the psyche's movement toward wholeness. Everything denied returns in the form of destiny. You can call it karma, coincidence, bad luck. It doesn't matter. Until you become aware of the cause, life will show you the effect. And it is patient. It waits decades, entire lifetimes, if necessary, because the goal isn't for you to win, it's for you to awaken. And awakening hurts because it requires dying. Dying to the persona, to the lies that sustain you, to the identities that protect you. The machine of becoming conscious isn't external, it's internal. Every repressed emotion is a piston, every forgotten memory a gear. When you meditate, write, cry, or face a fear, you're lubricating this machine. When you pretend everything is fine, it grinds to a halt. Some prefer to numb it with distractions, others choose to dive in. Only one of these paths leads to lucidity. Consciousness feeds on what you have the courage to look at, and the more you observe without judgment, the more it expands. The unconscious doesn't want to punish you. It wants to reveal itself. And when it starts speaking, the whole world responds. Synchronicities, dreams, symptoms, all conspiring to show you that life isn't against you. It's your own soul trying to remember. But what happens when this machine begins to collide with the ego, which still tries to maintain control? When the self pushes and the ego resists, this is where the true conflict of existence arises, the dialogue between the ego and the self. There's a war raging within you, silent but relentless. On one side, the ego, that little general who believes he commands the army of your life. On the other, the self, the invisible commander who knows the entire field. Carl Jung described this struggle as the central axis of existence, the self wanting to remain secure and the whole wanting to expand. The ego wants predictability, the self wants truth. The ego seeks control, the self demands surrender. It's this tension that shapes your story. Every emotional breakdown, every twist, every seemingly senseless loss is a conversation between these two centers of the psyche. The ego says, "I don't want to lose this." The self responds, "You must." And life carries out the sentence. When something you love is ripped away, the ego calls it tragedy, but the self calls it liberation. What the ego calls failure, the self calls a course correction. This is why suffering is sacred. It is the language the self uses to make itself heard. While the ego defends itself, consciousness tries to emerge. Jung observed that all transformation begins when the ego bows, not in submission but in lucid surrender. It is the moment when you understand that not everything that hurts is wrong, and not everything that gives pleasure is right. The psyche is paradoxical. What destroys you also saves you. This is why the more the ego fights, the more life tightens. The self doesn't want your comfort, it wants your wholeness, and wholeness doesn't come from victories. It comes from the ruptures that force you to be real. There are people who live and die trapped in their ego, believing the universe has betrayed them, when in reality it has only offered them mirrors. Each disappointment is a letter from the self, returning to the sender what never belonged to them. This dialogue isn't cruel, it's necessary, because without it the ego becomes a tyrant and the soul withers. You realize this when something inside you says, "Enough is enough." And no more acting, no more pretending, no more wearing masks that no longer fit. It's the self knocking at the door, asking to come in, and it enters with fires. Real spirituality begins when you stop trying to overcome life and start listening to it. When you understand that the ego's resistance is the fuel for transformation. And it is at this point, when dialogue becomes listening, that a new voice emerges. That of the story the unconscious is trying to tell you. Because once the ego begins to give way, an even deeper question arises. If life is a conversation between who I think I am and who I really am, who is writing the plot? This is where personal myth and the power of storytelling are born. You don't live reality. You live the story you tell about it. Carl Jung said that every human being is driven by a personal myth, an unconscious narrative that gives meaning to what we call life. The problem is that almost no one chooses their own myth. It's inherited, imposed, copied. You grow up believing you need to be someone, the successful, the beloved, the strong, the spiritual, and you build a character to support that. But the soul isn't a character. It's an author, and when the script no longer matches the truth, life changes the genre of the story. Drama becomes tragedy, comedy becomes silence, romance becomes a mirror. Everything that happens to you is the psyche trying to pull you out of a fiction. Depression, anxiety, emptiness, these aren't flaws. They're pauses in the narrator's mind. Life changes when you begin to realize that pain isn't the villain of the story, but the editor who trims away the excess. With each disappointment, the unconscious myth becomes a little more visible. "Nobody loves me" reveals a childhood fear of rejection. "I always lose" reveals loyalty to a failed identity. "I'm too strong to feel" reveals an escape from one's own vulnerability. You're not cursed, you're just acting out an old narrative, and it repeats itself because the unconscious is an obsessed scriptwriter until consciousness rewrites it. That's why Jung said, "Until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it destiny." Destiny is the unrevised script. Freedom is the act of editing. Rewriting your personal myth isn't about inventing a new lie. It's about seeing the old one with clarity. It's about stopping romanticizing pain, but also about stopping running from it. It's about taking up the pen without erasing what's already been experienced. When you begin to observe your own narrative, you realize how symbolic it is. The lost love that teaches you about presence, the betrayal that forces you to look at yourself, the silence that shows you how much you spoke to be seen. Awareness grows each time you read yourself without judgment, and little by little, the plot ceases to be a tragedy and becomes a ritual. The personal myth, when illuminated, ceases to imprison and begins to guide. But to do so, it takes courage to face the most feared chapter, the one in which the shadow ceases to be a villain and becomes a teacher. Because only when you face the character that lives within the shadow does the true journey begin, the path of individuation. Most people want to find themselves, but few are willing to lose themselves first. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, integrating everything that has been denied, rejected, or forgotten. But the price of wholeness is the demolition of your image. You will lose the certainties that kept you safe. You will question the truths that gave you identity, and you will watch, helpless, as the masks fall one by one. The ego will call this a collapse. The soul will call it a rebirth. This is where the spiritual ceases to be aesthetic and becomes a surgeon. The self begins to pull at the thread of the lies you wove to be accepted. And when it pulls, the social fabric tears. This is the point at which you cease to belong to the world and begin to belong to yourself. To individuate is to descend into psychological hell and return with the pieces. It's to sit with the shadow without judging it, to recognize that the monster is just the part of your humanity you couldn't bear to love. Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming conscious of the darkness. And it's in this darkness that you discover gold. Every time you face a trauma without running away, a projection without blaming, a pain without denying, you are expanding your psychic contours. The ego fears this because it doesn't want to die, but consciousness needs it to die a little to grow. Individuation isn't perfection, it's integration. It's not becoming pure, it's becoming real. And the real sometimes is ugly, contradictory, chaotic. But it's only in chaos that the order of the soul is born. Some people confuse individuation with isolation, but it's the opposite. It's the process of reconnecting with the whole, now consciously. You begin to see the world as an extension of your own unconscious. The partner who angers you, the mother who hurts you, the colleague who mirrors you, they're all fragments of you trying to come home. When you understand this, the other stops being an enemy and becomes a messenger. Individuation transforms conflict into dialogue, rejection into reflection, loss into liberation. There's no longer guilt, only awareness. And it's at this point that the psyche begins to expand beyond the personal, touching the universal. Because deep down, what we call I is simply the self recognizing itself in human form. But what happens when this self begins to realize that it is not expressing itself through you, but as you? When consciousness itself recognizes itself in your breath, that's when the next mystery arises, consciousness discovering itself through you. You are not a human being trying to be conscious. You are consciousness itself trying to be human. Carl Jung realized this when he understood that life does not happen for us, but as us. Every thought, every emotion, every encounter is the universe observing itself from within your skin. The body is the disguise of eternity. The psyche is the stage where infinity becomes intimate. The mistake is to think there is a separation between you and the whole, when in fact the whole only exists because you perceive it. It is through your pain that the cosmos discovers compassion. It is through your joy that it understands plenitude. You are the mirror of the divine, and the reflection changes according to your courage to look. Consciousness wants to know itself, and the name it uses for this is you. When you suffer, consciousness isn't frightened, it observes. When it loves, it expands. When it's silent, it listens to its own origin. This is why every attempt to control life fails, because you're not the driver, you're the vehicle. Existence doesn't want you to understand everything, it wants you to experience it. It wants to know what it's like to be limited, mortal, confused. It wants to feel the fear of loss, the pleasure of touching, the beauty of making mistakes. And while the ego struggles to find meaning, the self already knows meaning is feeling. True spirituality begins when you realize you no longer need to seek God, because He is already using you as eyes. Jung said the soul is a piece of eternity trapped in time, trying to remember who it is. This is why certain pains have no explanation. They are memories of wholeness trying to resurface. There are moments when this awareness reveals itself without warning, a sunset, a sudden silence, a reasonless tear. For an instant, everything stops, and you feel there are no boundaries between inside and outside. This is the glimpse of the self, the moment when the observer and the observed become one. After that, nothing is ever the same again. You begin to see that even mistakes are perfect, because they are part of the choreography of awakening. Consciousness doesn't judge, it only records. And the more you participate in this dance, the more you realize that life is not a search, it is a remembrance. And remembering yourself is the most sacred act there is. But consciousness, curious by nature, wants to recognize itself in every possible way, even the densest. This is when it descends from eternity to play with matter. And when the spirit decides to play at being form, limited, mortal, earthly, the divine folds in on itself. This is the birth of duality, the world's oldest paradox. The next step is to understand the dance between spirit and form. Consciousness can only recognize itself when it limits itself. This is why the spirit dresses itself in flesh and the eternal compresses itself into seconds. Carl Jung understood this descent as an act of cosmic love, the infinite accepting the boundaries of form in order to see itself reflected. The body is not a prison, it is a mirror. It is in it that the invisible becomes visible, that the transcendent learns to stumble and the divine discovers what it means to bleed. There is beauty in being imperfect because it is in the cracks that light escapes. The spirit, when incarnate, does not seek purity, it seeks experience. It wants to know what it is like to be hungry, to lose control, to desire, to err, and to begin again. It wants to touch the ground and feel the weight of gravity. Because without the ground, the soul cannot take root. And without form, the spirit would never recognize itself. But the problem is that human beings get lost in the mirror's surface. They forget they are reflections and begin to believe they are merely images. They identify with their bodies, their names, their masks, believing the role is the whole play. This is the origin of existential pain, the spirit that has forgotten its true nature and tries to find eternity in things that rot. Jung saw this as the collapse of the modern soul, a humanity obsessed with appearing awake, yet deeply asleep within itself. We seek the divine in the heights, when it is hidden in the small things, in the breath that anchors you, in the touch that brings you back, in the tear that brings you back to the present. The body is a temple, but you treat it like a prison, and as you try to escape it, you lose the miracle of being embodied. The dance between spirit and form is the oldest choreography in the universe. Form limits, spirit expands. Form dies, spirit is reborn. And, between one beat and the next, consciousness discovers new rhythms. Have you ever noticed how pain and pleasure are identical in intensity? It's the same energy, just dancing opposite steps. Suffering, when seen through the eyes of the self, is the spirit testing the resistance of matter, its fire polishing the vessel. And when the vessel shatters, the spirit doesn't weep. It overflows. Integration isn't escaping form. It's dancing with it until movement becomes prayer. And each conscious gesture is an invisible altar erected within you. But life doesn't stop there. Because this dance has a purpose, to fuse what was once separate, to reconcile heaven and earth within the soul itself. And when heaven and earth finally meet, existence reveals what it always was, a sacred rite of remembrance. Every relationship, every pain, every joy is a secret ceremony of the soul. This is what life tries to show you in the next step, life as a ritual of integration. Life is not a sequence of coincidences. It is a meticulously orchestrated ritual to restore you to wholeness. Carl Jung called this the process of individuation, the silent alchemy that transforms suffering into consciousness. Every person who crosses your path is a symbol, every loss an altar, every wound an initiation. You think you are experiencing events, but you are actually undergoing ceremonies of the soul. Trauma is not punishment, it is consecration. The love that ends, the friendship that breaks, the fear that paralyzes you, all have a symbolic function to reveal what is still fragmented within you. And the more you try to escape, the more the unconscious repeats the same ritual until it finally understands. The universe does not want your perfection. It wants your integration. It wants the reunion of the pieces you exiled. This is why nothing is wasted. The failure that humiliated you was purifying your pride. The loneliness that suffocated you was teaching you presence. The mistake that shamed you was dissolving the mask of superiority. The ritual of life is brutal because it is real. It does not accept spiritual hypocrisy. There is no point in feigning light if your gaze still rejects shadow. Jung said that the unconscious does not forgive falsehood. It demands authenticity, even if it hurts. Each cycle of pain is a symbolic purification, a bonfire where the soul burns away the illusions that the ego insists on wearing. You don't need to seek temples, mantras, or gurus. Life is your temple, pain is your teacher, silence is your mantra. And when you understand this, even suffering kneels before consciousness. But integration isn't about resolving it. It's about sustaining the paradox without running away from it. It's about accepting that it can be strong and fragile, lucid and confused, light and shadow, all at the same time. The soul matures when it stops trying to eliminate the opposite. True love is born when you love even what is difficult to love. True spirituality isn't about escaping from pain, it's about being present within it. When you stop running, the universe changes its tone. What was once torture becomes a lesson. What once seemed like punishment reveals itself to be communion, and little by little, you realize that life isn't punishing you, it's preparing you, because integration isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of surrender. Because when consciousness finally understands that everything was ritual, the only possible movement is surrender. And it is at this point that the mystery is fully revealed, surrendering to the stream of consciousness. There comes a time when resistance becomes a form of slow death. Carl Jung called this point psychic surrender, the instant the ego bows before the self and recognizes it was never in control. Surrendering isn't giving up. It's stopping fighting what is. It's allowing life to pass through you even when you don't understand why. Consciousness doesn't need control. It needs space. While the ego tries to dominate the course of the river, the self wants you to become the river itself. And the more you let go, the more you realize the current knows where it's going. Life doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to disarm you. It wants to strip away the armor you built out of fear and clothe you with the lightness of someone who finally trusts. Surrender is the most courageous act of all because it requires abandoning the illusion that you know the way. Control is fear's ultimate disguise. The mind says, "What if it goes wrong?" Consciousness responds, "What if it goes right just because you stopped pushing?" Jung saw this transition as true spiritual birth, when the I dissolves into the flow of wholeness. This is where the seeker disappears and the being emerges. This is where silence begins to speak. Surrender is a symbolic death. You die to the character and are born to the truth. Nothing changes outside, but everything changes inside. You continue going to work, paying bills, loving and making mistakes, but now something inside you observes it all without losing itself. The observer awakens, and the drama loses its power to possess you. And it is in this state that life reveals itself as it always was, a perfect choreography between chaos and purpose. Things cease to be right or wrong. They are merely different expressions of the same process. Mistakes shape you, success guides you, and both serve the same consciousness. When you surrender, fear loses its usefulness and time loses its weight. Trust replaces control, and for the first time, you live without resistance. There is no longer any need to prove anything, heal anything, achieve anything. There is only flow, the eternal movement of a universe remembering itself through you. Surrendering is the ultimate act of individuation, becoming the clean channel through which the self breathes. But what happens after surrender? What remains when the ego falls silent and only consciousness remains? This is what Jung would call the point at which life ceases to be lived and begins to know itself as alive. What if none of what you call life is really yours? What if what you call destiny is just the unconscious trying to wake you up? How many more times will you need to lose to finally see what is trying to be born through your pain? Life isn't punishing you, it's revealing you. But maybe you still need to bleed a little more to understand, because every time you run away, life comes back disguised as a lesson. And every time you try to understand, she forces you to feel. The question is not, what will happen to me? But who will I be when it happens? Perhaps what you call suffering is just the self whispering, "Wake up, I am you." If this tore you up inside, sign up now, because that was just the first cut.